Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this short meeting. I hope we can complete within about an hour. We want to talk a little bit about democracy and the values of it, and then how we can preserve it. That's the idea of our discussion today. And we are a democratic socialist republic. Or is it? So if you look at the history of our name, before the British, ancient Greek geographers called it Taprobane. Arabs referred to it as Serendib or Sahilan. From 1833 to 1948, during the British colonial time, we were called British Colony of Ceylon. Thereafter, in 1948, after independence, we were called Ceylon. And in 1972, the constitution changed. And our name was then Free, Sovereign, and Independent Republic of Sri Lanka. And in 1978, there was a major change. And then we were called the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, things have not gone that well for us over time. And in 21st century now, people are beginning to classify us as flawed or hybrid Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. This is really sad in a way, but then we need to explore and see why this has happened and how we can come out of it. So who says that we are a flawed hybrid democracy? So I'm presenting a layman's view. I'm not an economics or a politician, but people are welcome to correct my presentation or present other ideas and discuss this. So in 1978, when the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka was established by a new constitution, there were three independent institutions. The president, which was the executive branch, the judiciary, which was the legislative branch, and the parliament that made the laws, the judicial branch. So things went on. And we were under the impression the constitution made was by people for the people, because there was a great majority for the government at that particular time. However, now it's nearly from 78, it's nearly 50 years gone, 20, 40 years. So we've had already 20 amendments to the Constitution. So we've had a number of presidential elections, 1982, 1998, 1994, 1999, 2005, 2010, 2015, 2019. And most of the candidates, particularly in the recent times, when they participated in the election, they pledged to abolish presidency during campaign. But instead, once elected, they tried to strengthen the presidency. The most recent example is the 20A amendment. So the Constitution is approved, seemed to be approved by the politicians, for the politicians, by 2/3 majority, which is flawed. We know that because it was not really people's representation, because the parliament had 13% of MPs appointed through what is called a national list, which has in fact been a backdoor entrance to people who have failed and so on. So it was not used for the intended purpose. So this 2/3 majority was not quite people's 2/3 majority. Anyway, legally, the Constitution is valid. So now in 2022, we have a democratic socialist republic of Sri Lanka, but we're not very sure whether the three institutions are independent. The presidency has become, because of the powers, become more or less autocratic. The judiciary's independence is threatened. There are examples to it. And the parliament is virtually dysfunctional. You have statements made, various laws made, and nobody seems to follow them or take it very seriously. There is something called democracy index. Now, democracy index, I'll go into a little bit of details later on. And this is the map, the world map in 2021. This index is generated by the economic intelligence units in the UK. And they have classified the countries in the world into 4 kinds of democracies. You have full democracies, you have flawed democracies, you have hybrid regimes, and you have authoritarian regimes. So if you look at Sri Lanka, the score for Sri Lanka is 6.14 in 2021, which is the bottom end of the flawed democracy, virtually entering hybrid regimes. So we'll go into a little bit more detail about what it means. So this index, which is compiled by the Economist Intelligence Unit in the UK, is a measure of the state of democracy in 167 countries. So 166 are United Nations members. So the report is based on 5 findings. So they look at 5 aspects in each country. Electoral process and pluralism. That means at least 2 legitimate but different political parties exist. Then they look at the functioning of the government, a free and fair electoral process that enables the people to choose between candidates. The government that operates openly and transparently, works for the good of all people, respects its own rules, has proper checks and balances, and gives its citizens free choice and control over their lives. Then political participation. You have politically engaged citizens who support democratic principles, vote regularly, accept the will of the voters, and commit to a peaceful transfer of power after each election. Then they look at the political culture, where there's an emphasis on preserving civil liberties and personal freedoms of both the majority and minorities. Then we look at the civil liberties. That means a free and independent media, unhindered by government interference or influence or intimidation. So let's look at Sri Lanka. I have put in red that areas that we need to be concerned about. Saying there are at least 2 legitimate but different politics. That's true. We have that. But free and fair electoral process. I think we had a very fair process last time. But before that, we know even the big politicians who got elected boasted about how they rigged the elections before by filling the ballot papers. So we know that it has not been fair, at least at some point. The government that operate openly and transparently. We don't know the transparency at the moment. It is probably weak at the moment. Works for the good of all the people. This is an important aspect. Respects its own rules. Is that the case in our situation? Has proper checks and balances and gives its citizens free choice and control over their lives. Political participation, we need engaged citizens. Now, if you look at voting in Sri Lanka, hardly ever we exceed 70–75%. So there's about 30% people who does not vote or do not get a chance to vote. That's a significant number in here. Then political culture should have emphasis on preserving civil liberties and personal freedoms of both the majority and minorities. Now that is questionable. Then there are civil liberties, a free and independent media, unhindered by government interference, influence, or intimidation. Let's look at this. These two picks are actually from publications in this week. Unidentified men attack residence of Sri Lankan journalists. Chamudita Samaravikram. This is from this week. Then this article from yesterday, moving back to white man governance. So people talk about whether there's actual independence for journalism. Then there's lack of transparency, and we want things to be transparent. For a start, the appointments to the Human Rights Commission is not transparent. See, there's a criticism in here, again published. So we have 196 elected MPs and 29 national MPs. That's actually a 13%, a large number. It has become a backdoor entrance to call the national list, become the pathway for election lost candidates. So this is purely undemocratic because these are not people's representatives and contributes to the so-called 2/3. One perfect example is here. The leader in one major party lost the election in 2019, lost the seat as well, but in parliament and remains the UMP leader, completely undemocratic. So let's see what's happened to the democracy in the world. So in 2021, the scores were 0 is the worst and 1 is the best. The democracy in the world suffered. Eastern European countries maintained their scores, which is very good. But in that of the United States and Canada, the scores fell, but they still remain within the full democracy category. Spain was downgraded, and other Western countries remained as full democracies. Nordic countries remains the best democracies. Afghanistan and Myanmar are the lowest. Now let's look at it differently. Here is the 167 countries listed from 1 at the top, 167. The bottom is the Afghanistan. And the best countries are Norway, New Zealand, Finland, Switzerland, and Iceland are the best countries in relation to democratic index. and they don't propagate any wars, and they are developed countries and peaceful. We don't even hear too much about them. The Canada is the 12th, so it has dropped down this year. India is the 46th. Sri Lanka is 67th, bottom end of the flawed current democracies. And if you look at the lowest three, they are the North Korea, Myanmar, Afghanistan. And they only talk about wars and coups. That is the norm. And that is what they think that can develop a country. So you cannot really develop a country with a war and a coup. Now, Sri Lanka, what makes us flawed and hybrid? This was a survey that was published just 2 months ago in Sri Lanka. 27% of Sri Lankans would emigrate if they could. Why is this? We are losing skilled workers. If you look at the passport queue, here it is. So people think that is the way for them to have some peace and success in their lives. So the emigration, if you look at Sri Lankan diaspora, they are in different countries. Say there's a large number in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, India, Canada, Australia, Qatar, UK, Lebanon, Italy, and so on. So if you go down, least numbers are there in Thailand, Israel, Cyprus, Sweden, Maldives, Malaysia, China. Now, none of these countries will accept you just because you wanted to go there. They want skills. So if you have the skills, depending on the skills they need only, you will get an opportunity to migrate. So what this really means, we are Sri Lankan citizens and we were trained by Sri Lankan public expense, and then we gain the skills and they buy these skills without any investment money at all. So it's so cheap for anybody to import the skills at the price that they're paying for their local people. So this is fantastic. What a advantage for all these countries, but we are the real losers. So this is why we need to make the Sri Lanka environment good for people to stay and work so that the skills remain. Why do they emigrate? So some want a better quality of life, some want better earnings, but these are not the real reasons. Some talk about having more training opportunities, which is something that we can create in Sri Lanka. And fairness and equality is something that people look for. And peace, and then justice, then education opportunity for children, and healthcare. So these are the things that people basically want. And if they have better opportunities of getting them, they migrate. It's not always economy, because if you start living in a different country, there isn't a lot of economic advantage because the expenses are different in other countries. So why Sri Lanka cannot provide these? So if you look at why do doctors emigrate from Sri Lanka, a survey, this was published about 6 years ago. Most cited reasons for migration were a perceived better quality of life, better earnings, and more training opportunities in the host country. However, a good democracy is fragile. So this is why the voter base has to be aware of it and then think carefully when they vote. So the democracy is based on freedom and equality between all people. The aim is to protect the best interest of the people, regardless of their race, gender, sexuality, religion, or political opinion. There are two methods. Direct democracy, this is where everyone gets a chance to vote on the outcome of a decision. For example, Brexit of the UK referendum held in 2016. Then you have a representative democracy. This is what we have, or we originally had. People vote to elect officials to make decisions to reflect the wishes of the people. This is such as the parliament. But for us, There are loopholes. I just mentioned about that 13% of the membership in the parliament are not elected people. And that gives a huge bias when it comes to decision making. So let's look at why should we try to save a democracy? Protecting the interests of citizens. People vote on the key issues and elect representatives to make decisions. We promote equality. All people are equal in the eyes of the law, and every person gets a vote. So this is what makes it peaceful. Preventing abuse of power. Elected people are in authority and obliged to carry out people's will. And creating stability. Have rules and laws that provide stability and protect human rights. So these are the benefits. But there are problems with democracy as well. Not everyone exercises their right to vote. So this is why, for example, in Australia, voting is mandatory by law for certain elections. If they don't vote, you get fined. Not everyone has the right of the vote. Now, this is a problem that's being currently addressed or trying to be addressed in USA, for example. Not everyone gets the right to vote. Decisions can take a long time because the process of changing laws and making decisions has to go through various stages, which is a good thing, but sometimes it could be bad because the decisions take a long time. Not everyone who votes is well informed. Now, this is a problem that we really have in this country. Not everyone has the specialist knowledge required to understand the full implications of their vote. So the vote is very important thing, but people don't take it that seriously. There's still a risk of corruption. Once someone is elected into power, there are no guarantees that they won't use that power for personal gain. This is something that in a full democracy will not happen, where you do not use elected positions power for personal gain. Our people make promises to people to get voted in, but do not keep to the promises made once elected. This is a major problem for us. So these things create economic equality. In fact, having economic equality is the biggest threat to democracy. In Sri Lanka, here's a poverty map. This here, the darkest ones are the most number of poor people are living, and it's very prominent in Sri Lanka. This is from the World Bank. So now you understand democratic index. Most hybrid regimes or authoritarian regimes are also poor. They're not that rich countries for everyone. I mean, they may have money, but it's not equally distributed and so on. So let's take full democracies. These are like, for example, Ceylon in 1948 and independence, we have probably a full democracy. Civil liberties and fundamental political freedoms are not only respected, but also reinforced by a political culture conducive to the thriving democratic principles. These nations have a valid system of government checks and balances. So the government is basically transparent. An independent judiciary whose decisions are enforced. So judicial decisions has to be properly enforced. The governments that function adequately. Diverse and independent media, and democratic function has no problems. Flawed democracies, elections are fair and free and basic civil liberties are honored, but may have issues. Example, media freedom infringement and minor suppression of political opposition and critics. Say, I put it in red because this is something that's relevant to us. These nations have significant faults in other democratic aspects, including underdeveloped political culture, low levels of participation in politics, and issues in the functioning of government. Hybrid regimes, these are regular electoral frauds in them, preventing them from being fair and free democracies. Now, in hybrid regimes, you have these governments commonly apply pressure on political opposition, non-independent judiciaries, widespread corruption, harassment, and pressure placed on the media, anemic rule of law, and more pronounced faults than flawed democracies in the realms of underdeveloped political culture, low levels of participation in politics, and issues in the functioning of governance. So I put it in red here, things that are really relevant for us again, that we need to think about. And then the poor participation in politics, in the sense, political talk, political whatever that you do is not that welcome. And I can see from in our own discussions and so on, for national interests, there is little interest from individuals. And there's authoritarian regimes. The political pluralism is non-existent or severely limited. These nations are often absolute monarchies or dictatorships. We know what happened to Hong Kong recently. Their conventional institutions of democracy has meager significance. They're not democratic institutions. For example, the opposition that was there 2 years ago, members were arrested and put in jail, for example. Infringements and abuses of civil liberties are commonplace. Elections, if they take place, are not fair or free. They're called sham elections. The media is often state-owned or controlled by groups associated with the ruling regime. The judiciary is not independent, and censorship and suppression of government criticism are commonplace. So why should the people rule? Why should we be a proper democracy? Democracy helps to prevent rule by cruel and vicious autocrats. So we get representative democracies. They do not fight wars with one another. Countries with democratic governments tend to be more prosperous than countries with non-democratic governments. We've seen that in the world map as well. Democracy tends to foster human development as measured by health, education, personal income, and other indicators. Democracy helps people to protect their fundamental interests. Democracy guarantees its citizens fundamental rights that non-democratic systems do not and cannot grant. And democracy ensures its citizens a broader range of personal freedoms than other forms of government do. So there's a lot of advantage at personal level about freedoms and liberties in a democratic country. It also allows you to develop things, produce innovations and so on. Let's see our potential to develop and the obstacles. There's something called Human Development Index. This takes into account long and healthy life. So that depends on the life expectancy at birth and life expectancy index. Takes into account the knowledge of the public, expected years of schooling, mean years of schooling, and the education index. It takes into account the standard of living, that is the per capita income in dollars, that is a GNI index. So putting all three together, a human development index is formed. Let's see where we are. Now, what is in darkest color are the countries which highest development index. And you can see most of these countries are also developed countries. Ours is kind of light blue here. And if you look at Norway, the Human Development Index is 0.95. Australia 0.94, UK 0.93. And ours is 0.78. It's about even China, which is 0.76. So we do have a good potential to become a developed country quite quickly because we have what is needed fundamentally in the country to get this working. But there's what is called a corruption perception index. It uses a scale of 0 to 100. So when the corruption is minimal, it becomes greener. When the corruption is high, it becomes red. And the score also becomes lower when the corruption is high. Look at Sri Lanka's color here. It's like here. So it's 30 to 39. That's where Sri Lanka falls. And today in 2020, the Sri Lanka score was 37. The rank was 102 in 180 countries. Germany, Norway, Sweden, and Finland are the highest values, the best countries that has virtually no corruption. And the Sri Lanka's corruption index slipped further in 2021. So this is coming from the Transparency International research, which is actually a flagship research project of that institution. So let's put together Human Development Index on y-axis in here and Corruption Perception Index. So Corruption Perception Index, say high means there no corruption, and Development Index high means very good potential for development. And you can say Sweden, United States, Austria, and so on. So they are at this top end in here. See where we are. Here with 37 Corruption Perception Index and 0.78, we are somewhere here. We are close to countries like Indonesia, China, Timor, El Salvador, and so on. So we are somewhere here. So our problem is our corruption, which needs to resolve for us to be able to get into this level. So economic equality is our problem. Petty corruption remains a problem in Sri Lanka. And one reason is this: weak whistleblower protections have negative impacts on citizens' willingness to stand up against corruption. Nobody wants to complain anything because they might get affected in different ways, particularly if it involves powerful people or political people. Let's see. I mean, we know various scandals that has happened, but we don't know what legal situation and what kind of legal action that's been taken. There's a lot of talk about, but ultimate results are not known because it never happened probably. Now take, for example, Central Bank of Sri Lanka bond scandal. This was a financial laundering scam which happened in February 2015. The public loss was nearly $11 million. And we are not talking about having no dollars at the moment. So then look at the Sri Lankan Airlines. This is another publication, this is from 2015 again. Sri Lanka alleges billions lost in corruption at national carrier. So the Sri Lankan Airlines ordered 10 aircraft priced 2.3 billion, but this has to be cancelled because there was abuse of office and bribery allegations. So the purchase of planes were cancelled, but we had to pay $115 million. And we don't have any dollars, but because we just wasted money for nothing. Then recently we had sugar scam cost Sri Lanka 15.9 billion rupees in tax revenue. So public cost here, again, rupees 15.9 billion. There's a garlic scam recently. 2 container loads of garlic from Satosa, sold to a private trader at rupees of 135 per kilo, when it was actually 445 per kilo. And there were no invoices. So basically it was like a stolen situation. And that cost too is for the public. And there was importation of poison coconut oil. And then the sugar coconut oil scam seems to be the same people who are doing it. But who pays for all the losses? We pay. The people who are working class, they pay, but they make no fuss at all. And we carry on. This is another deal that was happened many years ago. Oil hedging deal turning into billions dollars scam in Sri Lanka. And here what happened was we bought oil at a hedged higher price because we got some kind of insurance say we buy at this particular high price oil when the world prices dived immediately after. And we virtually paid double the price for oil when the world price for oil was half of that. So who paid for this? Not a problem. We paid, the working class. We made no fuss about it because we're not aware of this. Not many people are aware of this, how our pocket get emptied up. So this one again, we had a fertilizer imported very recently by a Chinese supplier. We paid the work loss, $6.9 million. What? We had no dollars, but we made no fuss. We paid it, and who pays for it? Us, the working class. So we've had large costly scams, and there are small costly scams as well. Now, if we are saying we want to have tourists in Sri Lanka, why aren't they coming, and so on. So here you inquire about in the net about doing a holiday in Sri Lanka. And the first page says 9 costly scams to avoid when you travel in Sri Lanka. So you get a warning rather than a welcome when you look at how to explore Sri Lanka in the net. Why? Because of petty corruption that takes place at very low level, starting from tuk-tuk drivers to other people. So the public costs of this kind of thing, reputation, and less genuine tourists. So the tourists then who come even are just like us, looking for cheap and exploitatory kind of holidays. So we can't afford this, is it? The working class has to afford all these costs, but we are not making a fuss at all. This is another one that happened many years ago where a British journalist who helped limbless Gaza trip faced brutal death while holidaying in Sri Lanka. The Russian part undergoes surgery, police probing charges of sexual assault. The government assures justice will be done through chief suspect member of ruling party. Tourist industry officials voice concern. Public cost not estimated, but this kind of publicity is not very good for Sri Lanka at all. And who paid for it? Working class. We think it's not our problem, but is it? So here's how we have ended up. In billions of dollars, this is 2019, this is 2021, all our reserves have gone down to nothing, virtually nothing. And people get their money because they get printed money, but that's not enough. So they keep striking, saying, increase our salaries, and so on. But the actual problem is somewhere else. So then there is something called fragile states index. How likely or our risk of becoming a failed state? Look, our color here is somewhere between elevated warning and high warning. So we're not really in a good state at the moment in relation to this. So all people has to gather and then do something about these things, because unless we do that, we will not be able to improve. There's no point, criticizing a government or criticizing some individual, because what we really need is get together and make decisions ourselves in a better way. So we have a new constitution of the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka. I should summarize this at some point. But what is missing, an essential inclusion, is that we should have zero tolerance for corruption. That needs to go into the constitution. Then most of these things will get fixed automatically. So what is our problem? Our problem is the voter is biased. Now, this actually was a bit less maybe in the last election, because people used to say, even from my childhood days, I know or we are blue, or we are red, or we are green, and therefore my father voted green and I am voting green. My mother voted blue and I am voting blue. So people never thought about how they use the vote. Whereas in developed countries, people do change depending on what's been said and what's been done. And most of our voter base is ill-informed. Either they listen to fake stories or false promises. They don't really analyze the data, because one reason is nobody really tries to show the data like what we are trying to do now. And then it can be strengthened only if people who have the knowledge participate and share what they know. Then there's candidate selection, not democratic. No, this is another problem in Sri Lanka. Although we have a party system, the candidate selection is not coming from the representation of a particular electorate. Basically, the people don't say, well, I want this person participation as a candidate for this particular district or the election. Instead, the party leader selects which candidate should go there. And we know by example, some good people will never get there. And this bias that is coming from the party leader actually changes the whole landscape of representative democracy. So this is another problem that we have that needs to be sorted. So the leads is about, we learn from each other, share expertise and evidence, and we try to educate whatever the ways we means, so that people use proper logic with good backgrounds and make good decisions, so that hopefully Sri Lanka will start moving upwards. This is why I always say, if you know something, if you can share some knowledge, if you can give some knowledge, please join us and do this so that we can go forward. In any language, it's welcome, English, Sinhala, or Tamil. And if you want to contact me, so just write to admin.srilankaleads.com. And it's time for discussion. So I'm happy to ask or answer any questions or get comments as to what should be done from the participants. Welcome.
Thank you, Chola. Thank you. It's very educative and a lot of ratios and the numbers and drawn from Transparency International and Economic Intelligence Unit. One question I want to ask about this voter. You said the last or the penultimate slide says the voter is ill-informed. Now, in today's context, where this social media is also very strong, how do you propose to arrest this situation? I think that is the key, because
that is actually
yes.
That is actually the key. The problem is in our countries that we are not very research methodology oriented. So what happens is that when we get some message, we don't try to analyze how a particular message came through and how it was supported, showing evidence and so on. So for example, if somebody says our democracy is bad, people might believe it or not believe it, and not in the way that I've sort of shown what data is there and so on. So we are not that exploratory as a nation as to how to look at a particular information and see whether this is right or wrong. So there's a lot of fake news, and then because of the way the people use, for example, at the moment, the web users, for example, there's a lot of data that's collected about the internet users as to what kind of things they look at and so on. But it's never published or known, although people could buy this information. And we know even in Sri Lanka elections, people bought using huge monies to find what kind of people do what. And even in, for example, I was seeing a documentary in USA that what people looked at, and then they sent information with pictures and etc. that might, interest certain particular group. So in social media, what happens is that You might suddenly get a notice of something, but you are shown it because your tendency is to see those things. So that is how you change the mindset, giving information to kind of information that you like to see. I mean, it's not really true or false, just kind of something, a fake kind of news. And these kind of things actually have affected the politics, and people are trying to fix that. But what we can do is by talking like this in the long term, trying to show the background of certain things, we may be able to get the correct message. That's important. And that's how we can talk about it. And also particularly people expatriated can also talk about these things because they now experience what is there in the other side of the world. People who are living in Sri Lanka don't get all that information, actual information about living abroad and the experiences. Anything else?
Yeah, thanks.
Anything else?
Yeah, Chula, I notice from your Human Development Index and the Corruption Index, the Rwanda has come a long way despite the fact that their Human Development Index was very low. As you know, Sri Lankan Human Development Index is considered high despite having low per capita income because of our social development. But Rwanda has come a long way, in that grid I saw.
Yeah. So obviously they may have developed their skills and so on. And what I think the Rwanda at one point got rid of all their white people. Is that right? Long time ago? Yeah. During their
I noticed their corruption index. I think they have scored a lot.
Yeah. So that's right. So now they have gone the whole cycle, and they're importing white people to come and teach them how to do farming or something like that. I heard something like that. So it's not, so they've learned their lessons. I think we should talk about at some point about the countries that has gone in that kind of direction, not being full democracy, and how they have suffered. So the people would have, I mean, we don't know exactly what the Rwanda situation is, but we can find out. Obviously, people would have educated themselves and so on, and have more skills and so on. So they have a potential to bring up. So in Sri Lanka, we are very good at the moment. I mean, in the sense compared to developed countries, I mean, having a 0.78 score is very good. So if we really think very carefully how to improve, then we can get there. For example, innovation and research. I mean, this is very low at the moment in Sri Lanka. We should have open education so that people can do whatever the research they want to do, so other than to suppress them. And then see how to improve. Say in for example, you take your industry, for example, tea. I mean, we had Ceylon tea, we had a brand, but it's not getting through that much at the moment. And here I saw once a documentary about how they make PG tips, for example, or any other brand of tea, and they how make that tea by combining various teas from the world together, give a particular popular flavor. So you need a lot of data to decide what flavor is popular and how to produce it. So say, for example, for tea, if we want to improve our tea export, we probably have to start manufacturing, say, a tea brand, saying this is Ceylon tea flavor 1 or whatever, what you want to call, because we need that data from the consuming people to see what flavors they prefer. Depending on different countries, the flavors will be different, the concentrations will be different, and so on. So say even the amount of tea that you put into a tea bag is clearly measured. Say in the UK, for example, if you take a tea bag, you keep it for even 1 hour, it doesn't overdo it. So the concentration of tea you get is the same, whether you kept it for 10 minutes or 20 minutes in hot water, one tea bag. So likewise, we need a lot of data or promote people to do research so that you can use that data to be, economically strong and also produce what is needed or what is in popular, because the popularity of particular commercial product changes. It doesn't stay static. That's why we need continuous data collection and exploration.
Correct. Thank you.
Anything else?
Not from me. That's okay.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I think I'm quite welcoming various questions because it's, after all, it's a discussion. We are not going to make any decisions as such, but if we can make people more aware of things, I think we may be able to recover from the current problem to a better state. I mean, we don't want to blame anybody. We don't have a blame culture, but we can inform people as to say how to improve so we can go forward. I mean, something that I want to talk about is road traffic accidents in the future, which I will do. And we'll see how we progress. Please tell anybody who wants to come and talk about something, you're welcome.
All right.
Yeah, great. Thanks for being there.